Welcome back to Power for the Peaceful. I'm Mark Mullinex. Our podcast is where ancient wisdom meets daily life, one verse at a time. Today, we're exploring verse 79 of Lao Tzu, which I've titled Keeping Faith, Not Score. Now, I'll soon be releasing the final two episodes on verses 80 and 81, but this podcast is not over. Kindly keep your podcast feed open for bonus episodes, announcements, and for questions that come up from the class. See show notes for more info.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
To be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it. Confucius. The longer we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater is their power to harm us. Voltaire. So let's begin right away with the verse in my translation. Verse 79. Keeping faith, not score. Once you've made your peace after a bitter dispute, why keep circulating bad blood? How do you repurpose any lingering resentments towards your common good? Consider how sages hold gracefully to their positions in contracted obligations. They keep faith not by pressuring the other party. The virtuous focus on their obligations with others, win-win. But the unvirtuous focus only upon the scorecard of what others owe them, lose-lose. Heaven's Tao plays no favorites. Anyone keeping faith is already synchronizing with Tao. So first, to understand this verse, we have to do some homework in the idea of transference. Transference is a psychological idea that when we regard the world, we usually see the world not as it is, but as we are. That is, I view the world only as a reflection of myself. Sometimes, I confess, I see that world outside so fully colored by my own inside negative reflection of self that I cannot really see the other as they actually are on the outside. Example, when I want to confront someone else's flaws in a self-righteous mode, I usually do not remember that first it is my own flaws that have been triggered. Essentially, I project onto the other my own defects and merely attack someone's perceived shortcomings with my own actual defects. So today's verse is a reminder that clear sight and clarity of heart are our first orders to live responsibly in a community, so I don't confuse other people with myself. Next, this verse walks the knife edge between justice and peace, between the low ground of seeing others through a righteous indignation that's barely and rarely righteous, and the higher ground of forgiveness and keeping faith. And in true Taoist fashion, this verse nudges us gently, not towards moralizing, but towards flow. We can repurpose any situation for the better. We can take a sad song and make it better. We can change the matrix and repurpose deterministic algorithms of scorekeeping with a reframed measure of faith. This is Tao's radical freedom. So let's break it down. How do we keep Tao's promised freedom at arm's length? Why do we keep circulating bad and enslaving blood? Have you ever had a relationship where the conflict technically ended, but the tension never did? The hatred and resentment just kept on for years? Maybe you resolved an issue, but did you resolve the energy? Energy that keeps you revisiting and building resentments and false narratives of how I, poor me, am always the victim, a victim whose day of revenge and vengeance will come. But Tao asks, if it can ask, after peace gets made, why continue to poison your wells? What's gained by keeping score, by recirculating rotten, rancid resentments? When you practice Wu Wei, or early retirement from ego-assisted schemes, you dismiss perceived grudges, resentments, and complaints in order to forgive. You're not just forgiving what happened in the past for a new present, but you're going to change the future. And is not changing the future so it does not resemble the present the goal here? I have performed many weddings and had many hours of talking with couples about to get married or who have been married, but they seem stuck. And in my own relationships, I too have often been stuck. What are we stuck in? The past. And it's usually resentments that figure hugely in our being stuck. Someone, at some time, did something that got misfiled in our psyche, and that thing has now metastasized into the unspoken elephant in the room. Everyone's trying to tiptoe around that elephant, not daring to awaken it, for if awakened, it would be too powerful to calm down. Resentment opens the front door of a relationship to the elephants. Resentment is the acid that dissolves relationships right in front of that sleeping elephant. Some issue in the past may be over, but not its energy. Someone's holding on to something that belongs only in the past. And remember, holding on to something that we have no business holding on to and grasping leads only to spiritual rope burn. We hurt only ourselves first, and the relationship that could become better instead becomes worse because we're not present for it. Our modern world is steeped in transactional thinking. You owe me. I did this for you. You didn't do that for me. Relationships can easily become emotional and transactional spreadsheets. Let's see, you remind your partner. Back in 2015, you did this. And in 2016, you didn't do that. And then when the pandemic happened, you brought home the virus 3 times. Understand? The keeping score sentiment, you owe me, becomes the only currency we feel we have to negotiate with. And then the relationship goes into recession, and then depression, and then ruin. I've seen it too often and lived it too often myself. I mean, we've all seen long feuds, the breaking of promises, and no one breaks the cycle of mistrust with faith for fear of being seen as weak. But today's verse invites us to shift the paradigm from scorekeeping to faith-keeping and soul-keeping. Feel the invitation to engage in restorative justice, where you take the lead to restory the past so the present isn't so full of poisonous resentments. Restore, reframe, reconcile, and remember. The compassionate one acts first. Verse 69. There is no calamity greater than belittling one's enemy. You just lose your 3 virtues. The strategist of compassion prevails. Now there's a bit of ancient word nerdery here. The phrase translated as contracted obligations comes from a term that literally means left side contract. It refers to the practice of recording debts on bamboo sticks, which were then split in half. One half went to the lender, the other to the debtor, so each had a clear understanding of their mutual obligation one to the other. There's a balance of understanding. Because here's the thing, both sides have to act in good faith. The pieces only match up if neither party tampers with them. The contract had no legal coercion or teeth. It just relied on integrity, not enforcement. And that's the heart of this verse. Virtue isn't about demanding what you're owed. It's about keeping faith, even if the other side falters. In other words, it's about first keeping faith with oneself. You know the math here. When you fail others, it's sometimes a life-changing event. Trust may never return. However, when you fail yourself, how do you ever reestablish truth with yourself? Whoa.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
I want to share an old story that embodies faith-keeping versus score-keeping. Long ago in China, even before Lao Tzu was alive, during a period of devastating floods in China, a citizen named Yu was assigned the insane task of solving an entire region's flood-prone problems while it was actually raining. But instead of building walls to block the water, as others had, Yu studied the terrain and learned to work with the water. Yu dug channels, created paths for water to dissipate in. Yu did not block, but cooperated with the water's flow. And by doing so, he became one of China's most legendary figures of harmony and service. Over many years, Yu succeeded not by resisting the nature of floods, but by cooperating with them. Thus, his new name became Yu the Great. Now, here's the part that's often left out. Early on in Yu's flood campaign, one of Yu's rivals had tried to discredit him early on, publicly questioning his methods. When the crisis ended and Yu was celebrated, Yu offered the chance to retaliate against his rival. But instead, Yu just invited his rival to partner with him to help rebuild the land. I don't see rivals, I see only colleagues. No revenge, no humiliation, just inclusion and grace. Yu wasn't keeping score, he was keeping faith. And that's Tao in action. Tao does not need you to be perfect, just aligned, just willing to trust the flow more than the fight. An earlier verse teaches the same wise path of keeping faith. From verse 49, the yoked leader. Without a hardened agenda, the sage has no interfering interest of her own. She merges her heart and mind with the people. To those who trust her and do good to her, or not, it's her nature to treat as trustworthy and good. Meeting everyone with virtue, she ratchets up every person's virtue. So let's bring this verse home to situations that mirror back to us, perhaps some familiar scenarios. The first modern analogy I want to provide are sports teams that play only for the win, but also sports teams that play for each other, not for the victory, not for the stats. This second kind of sports team succeeds because no one has to always pay back favors. They just have each other's backs, eyes on each other, and not the scoreboard. Next, consider 2 or 3 rock climbers who begin a difficult ascent together. Well, what if one of those rock climbers' goals was to get to the top the fastest way and ignore the tension of the rope and other ties that bind between themselves and their companions? The only question then becomes, who's going to die first? And finally, imagine 2 co-workers, I'll call them Jamie and Alex, who've had a pretty rough time collaborating on a shared assignment. There have been miscommunications, missed deadlines, tension and friction starts to heat up the room even when no one was speaking, because Jamie and Alex are silently and hotly formulating and rehearsing their comebacks. Eventually, there's a meeting with their manager. Honest communication, honest conversation, apologies, and they both agree, yes, let's move forward. However, Jamie keeps the receipts, mentions old wounds, offer little side-eye reminders of what Alex has done wrong, rolls his eyes. Jamie, receipts against Alex in hand, slips into passive aggression, revisiting old wounds, but in subtle ways, nursing low-grade resentments like they're part of the job description. Meanwhile, Alex just shows up without drama, no emotional IOUs, just clarity, true effort, and a commitment to do what they'd said they would do. One is keeping score, one is keeping faith. Now, no one's really the villain here. It's just a matter of energy, and Tao teaches this. The one who lets go of already dead energy, gently, cleanly, truly, is already flowing with the current. It's not about being naive. It's about being free. Remember Confucius, to be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it. And Voltaire, the longer we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater is their power to harm us.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Question: does heaven play favorites? Let's do some Tao theology, because the final lines of today's verse offers a metaphysical paradox. Stated simply, many translators claim in this verse, heaven's Tao plays no favorites, yet the virtuous seem to prosper. Question: does Tao take sides? How do we reconcile this? Many translations declare that Tao takes no sides and plays no favorites, but then they go on to say that Tao does take sides with the good person. That is, the good person is on Tao's side, not vice versa. I love D.C. Lao's subtle translation of his verse 78 with its line, "It is the way of heaven to show no favoritism. It is forever on the side of the good person." While that may sound that Lao wants it both ways, I also see heaven as naturally smiling, as it were, on the good person. That is, those who cooperate with heaven and their heavenly nature within are more successful in their assignments and accomplishments and their peace. Maybe, no certainty here, it's better to consider how the one who cooperates with nature just finds everything easier because there's less, even nothing, to do. So let's be careful not to anthropomorphize Tao. Tao's not personal, nor some personal deity who actively chooses. The better question is not what Tao's up to, but what occurs within good people centered naturally within Tao. So, heaven plays no favorites, but when you keep faith, when you flow instead of fight and not keep score, life gets easier. Energy multiplies, peace grows. This is not favoritism. It's not metaphysics. It's just physics. So, here's something to sit with. You could call this homework. What grudge are you keeping that is keeping you? Can you let go of someone's obligation to you and still keep faith with them? Where in your life are you still keeping score? Someone with whom you silently rehearse your zingers and comebacks to belittle them? Is there someone you could stop tallying and start trusting just a little more? And are you building dams where you could be building channels? What would it look like to undam a scorekeeping past with presence and not punishment? We all want fairness, right? Tao reminds us that practicing purity of peace is greater than practicing mere parity. Good faith keeps the heart more open than any other leverage. And all I can say is amen. So here's the family-friendly rendering of today's verse. Verse 79, keep faith, not score. Even after making peace, grudges can stick around, like when you keep bringing up the past. Why not use that energy to make things better for everyone? The wise focus on what they owe, not what they are owed. They focus on working together and not keeping score. Tao doesn't play favorites. Anyone who stays faithful to their word is already in harmony with Tao. That's what Tao rewards. Thank you for listening. If this verse stirred something in you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. This podcast is an original labor of patience and love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks. Thank you, Audrey Davis, our artist. Thank you, Molly Hartwell, for your song, Put Your Roots Down. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. May your days begin in peace and become faith-keeping wounds for radical hope today.
When you're listening, are you listening?